They were told the British had no connection to German culture, that the enemy was culturally alien, that English surnames had no Germanic roots. But when 39 German women prisoners lined up for roll call at a detention camp in Kent in September 1945, a British sergeant reading names from his roster shattered their understanding of the world, not with cruelty, but with something that made reality itself seem impossible. A young German typist named Hoffmann answered her name, and the British sergeant looked up, smiled slightly, and said in perfect German, "Hoffmann. That's my family name too. My great-grandfather emigrated from Frankfurt in 1848. He didn't mock. He didn't dismiss the coincidence. He acknowledged shared ancestry, as though family trees could grow across enemy lines, as though surnames could survive migration and war intact. They expected alien names. They encountered their own. And in that moment, everything they had been taught about cultural separation began to crumble. If this story moves you, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more incredible true accounts from World War II. These histories deserve to be remembered. The early autumn rain fell steadily across southeastern England in September 1945. News of Germany's unconditional surrender and subsequent occupation spread through military installations like a slow-moving tide, discussed in victorious English and defeated, whispered German. For British authorities managing thousands of German POWs, it meant the complex task of processing, categorizing, and assigning work details to former enemies. For the German women captured serving the Wehrmacht as typists, radio operators, medical personnel, and administrative staff, it meant imprisonment in a foreign land whose language they barely spoke, and whose people they'd been taught to view as culturally inferior. In camps across southern England, German women who had believed in German cultural supremacy found themselves prisoners among people the Reich had dismissed as culturally bankrupt. The regime that had promised them a 1,000-year cultural empire had lasted 12. The superiority they'd been taught had proven hollow. Now they stood in formation, exhausted, isolated, waiting to be processed by guards whose cultural heritage they'd been taught to dismiss. Among them was Anneliese Hoffmann, 26 years old, a Wehrmacht typist from Frankfurt who had served in administrative offices from Berlin to occupied Paris. She stood with her chin up despite exhaustion, trying to maintain dignity in defeat. Next to her was Brigitte Müller, a former radio operator who had worked in communication centres across occupied Europe. Brigitte's hands shook constantly now, a tremor she couldn't control, legacy of months of bombardment and retreat. There was also Clara Schmidt, barely 24, who had been recruited from secretarial school in Munich and assigned to military correspondence. She stood with her arms wrapped around herself, trying to stay warm in the cold rain. The other women had learned not to ask about her hometown. Munich was rubble. The British soldiers who managed them were businesslike and efficient. There was no violence, but there was no warmth. They called names, checked documentation, assigned identification numbers. The women responded mechanically, trying to understand English commands, terrified of misunderstanding and punishment. "Right, ladies," a British officer announced, his tone flat. "You're being processed for work assignment, agricultural labour, factory work, or domestic service depending on your skills and our needs. You'll be housed in appropriate facilities. You'll follow regulations. Anyone causes trouble, you'll face consequences. Understood?" The women nodded, grasping perhaps one word in three. Work, they understood. The routine was almost comforting after months of chaos and uncertainty. Morning roll call was conducted by Sergeant William Hoffmann, a career soldier in his 40s who spoke German fluently. As he read through the roster, calling out names in alphabetical order, something remarkable began to happen. "Hoffmann, Anneliese." Anneliese stepped forward, head down, waiting for assignment. The sergeant looked up from his clipboard. He studied her for a moment, then spoke in fluent, accent-free German. "Hoffmann, Das ist auch mein Familienname. Mein Urgroßvater kam 1848 aus Frankfurt. Hoffmann. That's my family name too. My great-grandfather came from Frankfurt in 1848. Anneliese's head snapped up. She stared at the British sergeant, unable to process what she'd just heard. A British soldier, named Hoffmann, with German ancestry, from Frankfurt. Her Frankfurt. The sergeant saw her shock and continued in German, his tone conversational. He came during the revolutions of 1848. Political refugee. Settled in London, married an Englishwoman, raised children. The name stayed German, but the family became British. He paused. We might be distant relatives. Frankfurt's not that large and Hoffmann is common there. My family came from the banking district. My family lived near the Römerberg, Anneliese said slowly, her voice shaking. For 3 generations. Then we almost certainly share ancestry somewhere, Sergeant Hoffmann replied. He made a notation on his roster. You'll be assigned to clerical work. Your English will improve. You'll manage. He handed her an assignment card. Welcome to Camp Maidstone, Fräulein Hoffmann. Try not to hold being captured against me. Family reunions are awkward enough without war complicating them. The attempted humour was jarring. Anneliese took the card with trembling hands and stepped aside, her mind reeling. The other women had witnessed this exchange with growing confusion and disbelief. A British sergeant, named Hoffmann, speaking perfect German, claiming Frankfurt ancestry. Suggesting he and a German prisoner might be related. It contradicted everything. More names were called. Müller, Brigitte. A different voice responded. Corporal James Müller at the registration desk. He looked up as Brigitte approached. Müller, he said in accented German. Meine Familie stammt aus Hamburg. Ausgewandert 1880. My family came from Hamburg. Emigrated in 1880. Brigitte froze. But you're British, she managed in broken English. I'm British now, Corporal Müller replied, switching to English. But my grandparents spoke German at home. I grew up hearing it. War makes enemies of cousins, doesn't it? He processed her paperwork efficiently. You'll be assigned to communications work. We need German speakers to help process other prisoners. Ironic, yes? More names. More impossible coincidences. Schmidt. Clara? The processing officer. Schmidt here as well. Family from Bavaria. Emigrated early 1900s. Weber, Margareta. Response. My mother's maiden name was Weber. Grandparents from Cologne. Fischer, Helga. Reply. Fischer was originally Fischer. Family anglicised it during the First War, originally from Bremen. The pattern was undeniable. At least a third of the British soldiers had German surnames, German ancestry, German family histories. The German women began murmuring to each other, their voices rising with confusion and something like panic. This can't be real, someone whispered. How do they have our names? This is impossible, another said. They're British. They're the enemy. How can they be German? A British lieutenant noticed the growing agitation and called for silence. Through Sergeant Hoffmann translating, he explained, many British soldiers have German heritage. Between 1848 and 1914, over 300,000 Germans emigrated to Britain. They came for economic opportunity, political freedom, to escape conscription, to find better lives. They settled, married, had children. Those children are now British citizens. Some are British soldiers. You're looking at the descendants of Germans who left Germany and became British. It's history, not magic. The translation finished. Stunned silence filled the assembly area. The German women stared at the British soldiers, seeing them differently now. Not just as enemies, but as people who carried German names, German blood, German heritage in a British uniform. That evening, assigned to their barracks, the women couldn't stop discussing what had happened. A British sergeant named Hoffmann told me we might be related, Anneliese said, her voice hollow with disbelief. He said his great-grandfather came from Frankfurt. My family has been in Frankfurt for generations. We could actually be distant cousins. Brigitte added, The one who processed me, Corporal Müller, said his grandparents came from Hamburg. That's where my mother's family is from. We could be related. I could be related to my captor. But they're the enemy, Clara protested, though her voice carried no conviction. They defeated us. They're holding us prisoner. They're British. Yes, Anneliese replied slowly. But they're also Hoffmanns and Müllers and Schmidts and Webers. They have our names. How do you hate someone who shares your surname? How do you see them as completely other when they claim the same ancestry? The questions hung unanswered. Over the following days, the reality of their situation became clearer. They worked in camp facilities, administrative offices, communications centres, laundries, kitchens. They interacted daily with British personnel, and increasingly, they discovered the depth of German heritage in Britain. Sergeant Hoffmann managed the administrative section where Anneliese worked. He spoke German regularly, used it to give instructions, to make conversation, to bridge the gap between prisoner and guard. His German was flawless, not textbook German, but living, idiomatic German learned at home. One afternoon, working on camp records, Anneliese found herself talking with him during a break. "Your German is perfect," she said. "How is that possible if your family has been here since 1848? Hoffmann smiled. "My great-grandfather insisted his children learn German. My grandfather maintained it. My father spoke it at home, taught it to me. It's family tradition. We're British, but we remember where we came from." "Weren't you persecuted? During the wars?" "Some prejudice, yes. During the First War especially. Some families anglicised their names, hid their heritage. My family didn't. We served Britain. My grandfather fought in the First War, I'm fighting in this one. But we kept the name Hoffmann, kept the language, kept the connection." Anneliese struggled to understand. "But Germany and Britain were enemies, twice. How do you serve Britain while maintaining German identity?" Hoffmann considered this. "Because identity is more complicated than governments want you to believe. I'm British by citizenship, loyalty, and service. But I'm German by heritage, language, and family history. Those aren't contradictory. They're layers. War tries to make us choose one or the other, but humans are more complex than that." He paused. "Besides, my great-grandfather left Germany for good reasons. He opposed the reactionary governments of his time. He wanted democratic reform. If he'd stayed, he might have been imprisoned or executed. Britain gave him freedom. That's worth loyalty." "But you're fighting against Germany." "I'm fighting against Nazism," Hoffmann corrected gently. "Against a regime that betrayed everything my great-grandfather hoped Germany could become. I'm not fighting against German culture or German people. I'm fighting against a government that hijacked both." The distinction was subtle but profound. Anneliese had never considered that you could oppose Germany without opposing Germanness itself. As weeks passed, the German women settled into routine. The work was tedious but not harsh. The food was basic but regular. The guards were professional, maintaining distance but showing no deliberate cruelty. But the discovery of shared surnames had opened something. The German women began to see their captors as individuals with complex identities, with German roots and British loyalty, with family names that crossed enemy lines. Brigitte worked in communications alongside Corporal Müller. They discovered his grandmother's family and her mother's family had both come from the same Hamburg neighbourhood. They might actually be distantly related. The knowledge created a strange connection, captor and prisoner, enemy and possible cousin, separated by politics but connected by blood. One day, Müller showed her a photograph, his grandmother in traditional German dress, taken in Hamburg in 1875. Brigitte recognized the building in the background. "That's the Rathaus, before it was damaged." "Before both wars damaged it," Müller corrected. "My grandmother would be devastated to see what's happened to Hamburg. She loved that city, talked about it her whole life, taught me German so I could understand her stories." "Why didn't she go back?" "Because she'd built a life here, had children here, became British here. You can love where you came from and still choose somewhere else. Humans aren't trees. We can transplant. The conversations accumulated, each one chipping away at the certainties the women had carried. They had been taught that British and Germans were fundamentally different, culturally incompatible, naturally opposed. But these British soldiers with German names, German language, German family histories, they proved identity was more fluid than propaganda allowed. 3 months into their captivity, in December 1945, something crystallized the transformation. The camp organized a Christmas celebration, controversial because it would include both British personnel and German prisoners. Many British soldiers objected. Many German prisoners felt uncomfortable. But Lieutenant Colonel Parsons, the camp commander, insisted. Christmas was held in the camp's assembly hall. British soldiers on one side, German prisoners on the other, an invisible line dividing them. A chaplain spoke about peace and reconciliation. Then came carol singing. The British started with English carols, traditional songs the Germans didn't know. Then Sergeant Hoffmann stood and announced in both English and German that they would sing carols in German. Because, he said, Christmas transcends nationality, and because many of us learnt these songs from our German grandparents. He began singing Stille Nacht, Silent Night, in German, perfect German. Other British soldiers with German heritage joined in. Hoffmanns, Müllers, Schmidts, Webers, Fischers, British soldiers with German names singing German Christmas carols, learned from German immigrant grandparents. The German prisoners sat frozen, overwhelmed. Then slowly, hesitantly, they joined in. German voices from both sides of the hall, singing together. British and German united by a song, by a language, by shared cultural heritage that war couldn't erase. Anneliese felt tears streaming down her face. The absurdity and beauty of it. Singing German Christmas carols with British soldiers named Hoffmann, with her captors, who might be her distant relatives, with enemies who shared her language and heritage. Clara sat with her hands pressed to her mouth, sobbing. Brigitte sang through tears, her voice breaking on the familiar words her mother had taught her. When the song ended, silence filled the hall. Then Sergeant Hoffmann spoke in German. My great-grandfather left Frankfurt in 1848. He never saw Germany again. He died in London, having built a British life. But he never forgot where he came from. He taught his children German. He told them about Frankfurt. He kept the name Hoffmann. He made sure his descendants remembered. He paused, looking at the German prisoners. You're from Frankfurt, from Hamburg, from Munich, from cities my grandparents loved and remembered. You carry the culture they preserved. You speak the language they taught us. In some strange way, you're living proof that what they left behind still exists, still matters, still endures. He paused again. And we're proof that what left Germany didn't die, didn't disappear, didn't stop being German just because it became British. We're your emigrants' descendants. We're what happens when Germans leave and build new lives while remembering old ones. The words hung in the air, profound and undeniable. That night, back in their barracks, the German women processed what had happened. The Christmas carols sung in German by British soldiers. The acknowledgement of shared heritage, the recognition that German emigrants had become British while staying culturally German. They're German, Brigitte kept saying. Actually German. They speak the language, sing the songs, carry the names. But they're British. They're loyal to Britain. They fought against us. How is that possible? Because, Anneliese said slowly, identity is more complicated than we were taught. You can be both. You can carry German heritage and British loyalty. You can love German culture and serve a different nation. Humans contain multitudes. The propaganda said you had to choose, Clara added. That you were either purely German or you were traitor, diluted, degenerate. But these British soldiers prove that's false. They're German and British both. and that combination defeated us. The recognition was devastating and liberating. Over the following months, as winter turned to spring, relationships deepened. Anneliese continued working with Sergeant Hoffmann. They discovered more connections. His family's Frankfurt neighborhood had been near hers. His great-grandfather might have known her great-great-grandparents, family trees that potentially intersected in 1848. What happened to the Hoffmanns who stayed in Frankfurt? Sergeant Hoffmann asked one day. Anneliese's face fell. Many died in the bombing. Some fled east. Some were arrested by the Nazis for various reasons. My branch survived, but barely. Hoffmann was quiet. My great-grandfather left to escape political persecution. His brother stayed and was eventually arrested. The family who left thrived. The family who stayed suffered. It's strange how history works. Do you ever think about what would have happened if he'd stayed? Every day, I'd be German, not British. I might have been Wehrmacht instead of British Army. I might have been on the other side, fighting against Britain. Or I might have been arrested by the Nazis like so many Germans who opposed them. Emigration saved my family line, but it split it, made enemies of cousins. The thought haunted both of them. In early 1946, news came of repatriation. The German women would be returned home. Reaction was complex. Relief at going home, fear of what remained, grief at leaving unexpected connections. On their last day, a farewell gathering was organised. British personnel who had worked with the German prisoners came to say goodbye. Sergeant Hoffmann found Anneliese. I wrote down my family history, he said, handing her papers. Everything I know about the Frankfurt Hoffmanns who emigrated in 1848. If you return to Frankfurt, if you find any Hoffmanns there, tell them the branch that left hasn't forgotten. Tell them we kept the name, kept the language, kept the connection. Anneliese took the papers, tears streaming. I will, and thank you, for showing me that German heritage can survive emigration. For proving that our emigrants didn't disappear, they just became something more complex. Corporal Müller found Brigitte. My grandmother would have loved meeting you. Someone from her Hamburg, speaking the language she taught me, carrying the culture she preserved. Tell Hamburg, if anything's left, that we remember it, that we honor it. That emigration didn't mean abandonment. The German women boarded trucks, carrying small bundles and enormous realizations. As they drove away, British soldiers with German names called out farewells in German. Auf Wiedersehen! Gute Reise! Maintaining the language their grandparents had taught them. Decades passed. The German women scattered across divided Germany, rebuilding lives in ruins. Some never spoke of their time in England, unable to articulate what discovering British soldiers with German names had meant. Others told carefully edited versions. Anneliese returned to Frankfurt. She found the surviving Hoffmann families, told them about William Hoffmann in England, whose great-grandfather had emigrated from their neighbourhood. She helped reconnect families separated by emigration and war. She maintained correspondence with Sergeant Hoffmann for decades, two people who shared a name and possibly ancestry, connected by that shared heritage. Brigitte worked with refugee organisations, helping displaced Germans understand that diaspora wasn't death, that emigrants could maintain culture while building new lives, that German heritage could survive in foreign lands. Clara became a historian specialising in German emigration patterns, documenting how Germans who left Germany in the 1800s maintained language and culture while becoming British, American, Australian, building complex identities that transcended simple nationality. In 1985, 40 years after the war, several former prisoners organised a reunion. 6 managed to attend, elderly women now. They shared memories and talked about the experience that had defined them. Do you remember when Sergeant Hoffmann said he might be our relative? Someone asked. Everyone nodded. They remembered. It was the moment everything changed, Anneliese said. We couldn't see the British as completely other when they carried our names. We couldn't maintain that Germans who emigrated had betrayed us when we met their descendants, who honoured German heritage while being loyal British citizens. Brigitte added, I've thought about this for 40 years, about how surnames prove that families cross borders, about how emigrants take culture with them, maintain it, pass it to children who become citizens of new nations while honouring old heritage, about how the British Hoffmanns and Müllers and Schmidts are proof that German culture survived outside Germany, that it thrived, that emigration didn't mean cultural death. She paused. And I think that's what matters. Not that they stopped being German, but that they became German and British both. Identity is addition, not subtraction. The women sat in silence, reflecting on this truth. Years later, Anneliese's granddaughter found among her grandmother's papers a letter from 1946, written shortly after returning to Germany. I expected my captors to have alien names, to be culturally distinct, to be obviously other. Instead, I found a British sergeant named Hoffmann who might be my distant cousin, descended from Frankfurt emigrants. I found British soldiers who spoke German, learned from immigrant grandparents, who sang German Christmas carols, who maintained German heritage while being loyal British citizens. The British didn't defeat us with cruelty. They defeated our certainty with genealogy, our propaganda with surnames, our belief in cultural purity, with the undeniable evidence that German culture had crossed borders, survived emigration, thrived in foreign soil. In that Kent camp, I learned that surnames carry history, that emigrants don't disappear, and that family trees grow across enemy lines. I learned that you can be German and something else simultaneously, that identity is complex, that culture survives migration. I could never return to the simple certainties I'd had before. The story of Anneliese Hoffmann and the German POWs who discovered British Guards shared their surnames is not widely known. It doesn't fit neatly into narratives of victory or defeat. But it's a story worth remembering because it reminds us that in the midst of history's greatest conflicts, surnames remember what politics tries to erase. Sometimes the most powerful revelation is hearing your captor shares your family name. Sometimes genealogy defeats propaganda more effectively than any weapon. And sometimes the hardest truth to accept, and the most important, is that families crossed borders long before armies did, that emigrants take culture with them, that surnames survive migration, and that the person guarding you might be your distant relative because his great-grandfather left the same town yours stayed in, and now history has made enemies of cousins who didn't know they were related. War makes enemies of nations, but surnames remember that families crossed those borders peacefully, long before armies crossed them violently. If this story moved you, please like this video and subscribe for more incredible true accounts from World War II. Human stories that complicate our understanding of nationality and heritage, of emigration and identity, of what it means to discover your enemy shares your family name because his ancestors left your hometown generations ago. These stories deserve to be remembered and shared. Thank you for watching.